What's good, folks, and welcome to another episode of Disguised Coverage, part, of course, of the Cover One Sports Network and the only podcast in existence that gives you an equal amount of blueberries in each muffin. That, of course, is from the movie Casino. I hope everybody knows that by now. I'm your host of this show, Anthony Prohaska. Find me on Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro2_ANT. Give me a follow on the old Twitter. Give me a follow on the TikTok as well. Same handle, pro2_ANT. That's for all the regular people and fans of the show, of this network, wizards, witches, muggles, mudbloods, people of Middle Earth. Welcome to this show. Fun episode tonight on the show. We will dive into what's suddenly shaping up to be, every game is important in the NFL, but an important game for the Buffalo Bills as they come off a disappointing loss and disheartening loss to a degree against the New York Jets. And now they come into this game against the 7-1 Minnesota Vikings, a team that is absolutely rolling, but is a very interesting team for a variety of reasons. But they come in hot, they come in confident. Josh Allen comes into this game banged up. There's a lot of scheme pieces, a lot of X's and O's pieces to kind of dive into when it comes to this matchup and it comes to this game. And with that in mind, as you know, on this show, that's what we focus on, the hows and whys of the Buffalo Bills and the game of football in general. X's and O's, scheme and structure, talking about how and why this play happened, how and why this play worked, why it didn't work, this player evaluation, real football talk. And with that being said, I'm very proud to welcome my guest for tonight, Mr. Shawn Syed at Twitter, or on Twitter, at Syed Schemes, and of the Daily Norseman. Shawn, you have been one of my favorite Twitter follows for a very, very, very long time. I love your work. I enjoy you as a person, like I told you offline before we went live. You're fantastic. I'm pumped to break down some X's and O's and stuff with you tonight, and thank you for being here.
Anthony, that means so much. I think everyone on football Twitter knows what Cover One is for a reason. Guys like you and Eric, you really built something really, really cool. And I'm really glad that one year I'm covering the Vikings that we crossed over with the Bills. Maybe wish it was under a little healthier circumstances for everyone, but I think still a lot of fun stuff to go through to learn before this week, going into this week, and then going forward for the rest of the season.
Yeah, hell yeah. And just in case people, don't know you or aren't familiar with your work, tell them, I'll drop the banner here so they can see the Twitter handle. Tell them where they can find you, what you do, all your kind of work, everything like that. Get your plugs in as much as you can, shoot a shot.
Yep, guys, just follow me on Twitter at Syed Schemes. You're just going to get all 22 clips all the dang time. I love football so much. I think it's just such a beautiful mix of the most physical sport in the world while also being such a cool chess match. I'm a defensive guy at heart. I like to try and break defense down a little more than offense, but I think it's a little bit easier to do offense. But yeah, just played football for my whole life. I got a little coaching experience. I do this stuff with my brothers, and man, it's just such a beautiful sport, huh?
You mentioned a point that I love too, like the chess match piece of it is so beautiful and it's so intriguing, and it's funny that it's mixed within like the violence of, at this point, it's the proverbial like modern day gladiator type thing. But when you get down to it, when you get down to the X's and O's, the whiteboard work, the scheme and structure and how things fit together and the puzzle pieces, like even something for some people like run fits are boring. I'm a defensive guy at heart as well. And just the idea of like how you fit the run, like, and how the slightest thing, if the slightest puzzle piece is off, you can't put that whole puzzle together. And that is so intricate and beautiful in its intricacy and in that design. But again, it's enveloped in the idea that, everybody's just trying to get as big and as strong and as fast as possible so they can mash into one another and break the spirit of their opponent, which is also beautiful, but like scary. It's a weird thing to like.
Yeah, I have so much respect for all these players that are obviously some of the most talented people in the world. And I think that's something we don't appreciate about football as much. Like there is genius, but I think of Lamar Jackson as a genius, and really, I guess Josh Allen in a different way too. Like being like that spatially aware is a form of genius to me, right? Like I'm a lawyer. Like I don't think that, me like reading the law to you is any smarter than like the way a guy like Lamar Jackson, I've just been thinking of, because obviously I played on Thursday night, but the way he can avoid taking a hit or something, and then seeing Josh Allen, like he's not afraid, or he's not avoiding it at all. And obviously, watching him run last week was pretty cool. And, I hope he's good to go on Sunday.
Yeah, so do I. Fingers crossed. That was a pretty unfortunate, strip that he had against, or that was caused by Bryce Huff against David Quessenberry this past week against the Jets. And yeah, in a perfect world, I always want teams to come in full bore, 100% healthy. You really get to see the best out of everything. And also you get to learn more about your team and the players and everything. Like nobody wants to see anybody go up against, an A side go up against a B side. You want everybody at full health and full tilt. And we'll see what that looks like for Josh Allen as we head into this matchup. And that'll be something that we touch on and dive into a little bit on this episode. But Shawn, let's lead off with some Minnesota Vikings pieces as we set the table for this episode, diving into, again, the X's and O's, the matchup scheme and structure and all that kind of stuff. Because we are defensive guys at heart, let's start with the Minnesota Vikings defense. High level overview. Who are they? What do they want to be? Do they have, if they had a mission statement and something up on the wall that everybody had to touch before they went onto the field, like Notre Dame, who are they, in their souls fundamentally on defense?
Yeah, I think structurally, it's a good way to think of like, all right, well, who are your coaches, right? I think there's a lot of things from the Vikings that do carry over to the Bills. So hopefully it's not anything that's too crazy to think about. But defense coordinator at Danielle, he comes from that Vic Fangio tree. They're 3-4 base, but most of the time they're going to be in that 2-4-5 nickel, where Za'Darius Smith and Danielle Hunter are going to be on the edge. They play some of the penny front where it's kind of three guys pretty much in between the tackles and then those edge rushers as well with just one middle linebacker. And kind of the mission statement is like, let's just put a roof over the offense, right? Like we don't want to allow explosive passing plays, right? I know that the numbers for drives that have explosive passing plays are so much more likely to lead to scores than other drives, right? So we want to be in our too high structure on the pass coverage end. It's mostly kind of quarter, half or half, quarter. They have those cornerbacks that are tackling a lot. They play that kind of cloud force spot, really zone heavy team. Keep a light box as often as possible. I think it's common with most of the Fangio guys. They just want to rush four, right? You don't want to undo your coverage structure by sending a fifth guy. But I think that, it's more like 9 weeks into a new structure. They are getting more comfortable. So last week, I think they sent a few more pressures and they're doing a little bit more kind of fun things on the back end, but not a whole lot of man coverage. They got a new cornerback that's going to be starting this week, Caleb Evans, with Cam Dantzler hurt. But I mean, the most fun stuff every week is watching Za'Darius Smith, just pin back and just get after the quarterback. And I think they do a really cool job of the last 2 weeks. They had Heineke and then Kyler Murray, who neither of them are obviously Josh Allen, but they put edge guys out there to kind of box rush, keep the quarterback inside, and then just let Z Smith kind of just get after it on the inside. So I think they're just really smart, right? Like they understand their players. They have Eric Kendricks, Jordan Hicks, who I think are really good linebackers. Maybe something a little bit to be desired in pass coverage at times. I think it's hard as a fan to watch a team play. Like they're not just an off zone coverage team where I think if you watch from just the TV angle, you'll think it is like that, but they are definitely, hey, like I said, let's put a roof over this. Patrick Peterson, I think, is playing well, but it's an improving defense that has veteran playmakers. Harrison Smith's still there, of course. So I just think about it, similar to the Bills, right? Like we want to play a soft light box. If you're going to waste your first down runs, that's fine. I think that they have Dalvin Tomlinson, who's my favorite Viking. He's been banged up. I don't think he's going to play again this week, but really clog up the interior. And talking about run fits, like figure it out from your 4-2 looks the same way that the Bills do, and really put a lot of pressure on your linebackers in doing that. And right, a lot of yards let up. Hopefully not a lot of points let up. Turn the ball over a few times here and there.
Yeah, a little bit of that bend but don't break. I love that you mentioned the light box piece. This was a number that, again, I always start with the film and then I go look at the numbers to kind of see if it's marrying up with what I'm seeing and if the sample size is correct, and then use some of the numbers too to kind of lead me in some directions on the film. But the Vikings defense is sitting there with a 73% light box rate, which is the most in the entire NFL. And they also have a 29% light box rate versus the run, which is the fourth most in the NFL. Bills fans are no, stranger to light boxes at this point, but with what the Bills do, the Bills, I think, are more one-gapping, upfield penetration type of style in terms of what they want to do on the front. And the Vikings front, because they are more of that 3-4 base, you see more of that two-gapping. And I saw it a lot against Washington in the tape. Someone who Bills fans are very familiar with, Harrison Phillips, he had a strong game, and you're just watching him come off, and he's not getting through the gap. He's not getting too aggressive coming up, making contact, getting first touch, and then textbook extending and just watching. Okay. And then shed, let me go in this gap, or shed, let me go in the other, keeping those linebackers clean as well. So they do a good job with the fits with those light boxes. Again, something that'll tie into the matchups as we go further into this episode. Shawn, let's flip to the flip side of the Minnesota Vikings, the offense. The offense is so interesting to me in terms of its identity because you've got this superstar wide receiver that I think everybody recognizes in the NFL. And I think it's tough to name like who the best receiver is in the NFL, but I think he's in the Rolodex conversation in terms of who's the best wide receiver in the NFL. And then you've got this amazing running back, and you've got a really good number 2 wide receiver in Adam Thielen, who's been banged up. KJ Osborne's a really fun wide receiver 3. Then you add TJ Hawkinson. Dalvin Cook is a tremendous running back, arguably top 5, definitely top 10. You've got some good bookend offensive tackles. You've got a new head coach in Kevin O'Connell. And then you've got this quarterback in Kirk Cousins, where everybody likes to make jokes, whether it's his primetime record or just who he kind of is, in terms of talent and ceiling and floor and all these pieces. The offense is so interesting because of the different levels of players that they have, but they have stars, they have studs, but then Kirk Cousins is orchestrating all of it. And so many people just see him as this bland vanilla QB. But what is this offense, especially this year under new coaching from that Sean McVay tree? What are you seeing in terms of their identity, their philosophy, and who they want to be?
Yeah, I think on a philosophical level, right, Kevin O'Connell, of course, most recently comes from the McVay tree, and they bought over Wes Phillips, who I think he was the tight ends coach over there. He's offensive coordinator in Minnesota. Going to see 11 personnel base. They're going to play a decent amount under center, especially for a lot of their play action stuff. They're going to use pre-snap motion, but I know that you guys are not happy with how much pre-snap motion the Jets were doing to kind of pull guys in and out of fits or push them in and out of fits. They don't use it. Yeah, they don't use it in the same way, but it's going to be something that you got to think about. And in the run game, it's a really, really heavy zone scheme. When they're running to the weak side without a tight end, I'm pretty sure they just call it mid zone, where the path is a little tighter. They kind of want to get further inside. When they have a tight end out there, they're going to kind of want to log that end. They'll call it wide zone. They're going to get into heavier personnels. If they can stick you in single high, they'll run play action out of that. I think that they've used tempo in kind of cool ways where I think it's really a McVay thought that, look, if our offense is struggling, like let's get into kind of our tempo looks to do something. I think they were at like 15% tempo overall. I will say that as we've been talking about run fits, like the way that the game has evolved has been pretty cool. Like the Vikings boot game, it's just not good, right? And I think a lot of that has to do with like it's just not like chic anymore in the same way, right? Like linebackers understand that they're going to have a high, a mid, and then a low level on a slide route or something like that. So Vikings have struggled on that, but I do love their play action game. So, and I think the offensive line is a good run blocking unit, right? My concern is, especially I think our run into light box number is pretty high. So when we're running, it's usually into a light box. We get favorable looks. We're in 11 personnel. We're drawing nickel from the defense. But there's so many wasted early down runs. I'm sure that they don't think it's wasted. It's easy for me to call it a waste, right? I'm sure they're collecting information or getting something like that. But they're constantly finding themselves, second, third, and 7, 8, 9. And just like the amount of 3 and outs just drive me nuts. But on the pass game end, of course, Justin Jefferson, right? Our favorite gritty guy. What I love about Justin Jefferson is he is obviously an enormous talent. It's a great interview. And then Kevin O'Connell, I think, obviously understands that, right? So O'Connell he always says the word activate, right? He's like, I want to activate Justin Jefferson in a certain way. So the way that they activate him is move him around into advantageous matchups. Obviously, week 1, we see him on a linebacker a bunch. I'm sure that they'll continue to run those choice routes, keep him inside in certain ways. Or if you're going to, on the defensive end, if you're just going to unfound your coverage structure and get 2 over there. Now I'm so happy that they have TJ Hawkinson. Again, I really do love and respect Adam Thielen and KJ Osborne. Thielen is really banged up, and Osborne plays a different, more vertical role. But seeing Hawkinson kind of last week, he took like 60 out of 66 snaps, which is just like total nonsense to me. I know I'm like talking about what the Vikings offense is, but 60 out of 66 snaps for someone who I think he joined the team like 4 days ago. For like an NFL offense, right? It was so crazy.
It was seamless. It was a seamless fit.
Yeah, you would like see him looking in at the ball because like obviously he doesn't know what Kirk Cousins' snap count is. Like he met him like 3.5 days ago. So, and he looks like a Viking, which is kind of cool. But so moving on in the passing game, I do think, as you said, like I love Darius. bookend tackles, who I do feel pretty good about. There's some interior offensive line issues. I think that the Vikings would say that themselves. Teams have kind of attacked that, right? Find some way. Obviously, Washington, they played last week, has a good attacking front. And there's another team I know that has a good attacking front, and they're called the Buffalo Bills. So that's definitely a kind of an eye popper, where if a team can bring 4, kind of keep that 7 in the back and play around with their coverage structure. I mean, if you can get at any quarterback, it's going to kind of cause a problem. But the Vikings, they just have magic in the fourth quarter. They're an incredibly, I think, well put together red zone design. When they get down there, they're going to score. But there's just too much kind of in that middle period. They start strong and they finish strong. The middle period kind of sometimes will leave things to be desired. But kind of your high level takeaway, 11 personnel, zone run game, activate Justin Jefferson. If Justin Jefferson's going to be stopped, we got to obviously look for Hawkinson, Thielen Osborne as well.
Yeah, that zone run rate is a obvious takeaway. Again, they're sitting there at 79% zone run rate, which is second most in the entire NFL, which is going to tie into a point later that I'm very interested to see because of how the Bills have been kind of gouged a bit these past couple of weeks in gap scheme. I'm wondering how much does Minnesota stay true to who they are at their core and what they've been this season thus far? Or do they lean into some of these pieces that honestly have worked the last couple of weeks, going back to that Green Bay game and that piece? Again, this ties back to the chess piece and the beauty of football, like we talked about earlier. Like, what do you lean into? What dials do you turn up? What dials do you turn down? And that's one definitely to look for as we go forward. So thank you for setting the table for this Minnesota Vikings team, for some Bills fans who don't know, or some Vikings fans that are joining us who may not know too much about the X's and O's of their Minnesota Vikings. But that sets the table as I change the banner on the bottom, because now we're going to dive into the Buffalo Bills versus Minnesota Vikings game-deciding matchups. Shawn, you're the guest, so I'm going to let you go first. We're going to go 3-2 to 1. So give me your number 3 most important or game-deciding matchup of this game.
All right, so when we were putting the doc together, obviously one of the things I thought about, it's Josh Allen versus Josh Allen's elbow ligaments. It's a tough battle. But we can't do this podcast without talking about it, right? Like, I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to pretend to be able to diagnose it. It feels like it's kind of a long shot for Allen to be playing, and the offense puts a lot on his shoulders, as they should, right? Like, if you have an alien at quarterback, let him cook, right? So he can't be I hate to, this is so much conjecture. This is not schematic. This is not particularly like intellectual, but I can't see him playing at full strength. The Bills, obviously, they have February aspirations, right? I would imagine that, maybe might be smarter. I'm saying this as an unbiased observer on the opposite side, right? Maybe the smartest thing, to sit him versus the Vikings. And obviously, I don't know, is it just a grip thing? Is it every time I throw the ball thing, it hurts? But if anyone can play, it's certainly Josh Allen. I know Kevin O'Connell in his press conferences this week, he said, we should prepare for as if Josh Allen's going to play. Which, I guess. But I was firing up some Case Keenum film from the Browns last week. And he's a professional backup, right? But what is Josh Allen going to start? What is Josh Allen going to be? And now, if he doesn't play, does that mean that the Vikings automatically win? Candidly, I don't think so, right? I think that the Bills are a good enough team, and the Vikings just love playing with their food until their food plays with them. Enough that the Bills obviously still are, it's not going to be just some kind of blowout, but I'm concerned for Josh Allen because, I mean, we just want to see guys do well, right? Like, obviously, I'm wearing this like silly Viking shirt, but like, I want to see the best players play their best, especially in a matchup like this where, like, the Vikings, we still don't know what the Vikings are, right? I'm not sure if the Vikings know what the Vikings are. They're
unfigureoutable.
Like, I love Kevin O'Connell. Yeah, yes, absolutely. I love listening to Kevin O'Connell talk, and he's always saying, we haven't played our best game yet, which I think that's true for a lot of teams, but getting the opportunity to play such a high leverage situation in Buffalo with those crazy tailgaters. Like, I would love for obviously Josh Allen to be healthy to play at a high level in this sort of matchup. But I mean, just from knowing literally zero about it, it feels like it's a long shot that he would be 100%. And that makes me sad because either, like, no matter what happens, it's going to be, Josh Allen wasn't 100%, which is like wholly legitimate, right? A team that as many sail routes that they run, as many like late vertical throws that he can make. If you're like your whole cog of your offense is not 100%, it's I think fair to kind of complain about it, even if teams are all not 100% at this point. But so Josh Allen versus Josh Allen's elbow ligaments. I'm hoping that Josh Allen wins that fight. And yeah, obviously I'm rooting for his health, and I want to see him play well on Sunday.
Yeah, I'm in a similar boat with, I didn't have as pithy of a title for my number 3 matchup piece there. But for me, yeah, it starts with that Josh Allen action just because of how much this Buffalo Bills offense, and I've joked about it before on this show, in the Cover One Film Room, on Twitter as well. Like, if you open up the Buffalo Bills playbook, it's a picture of Josh Allen. And this offense has gotten to the point where you have this alien at quarterback, or unicorn, like whatever verbiage you want to use to describe him. And it's gotten to the point where I feel like the offense has started to rely too much on him to do alien or unicorn things, whether it's with his arm, whether it's with his legs, even just from something as simple as, being elusive in the pocket. Josh Allen, again, from a volume perspective, so could be a little misleading because the Bills pass a lot, but last year in the regular season, he was the most pressured quarterback in the entire NFL, 246 pressures. He was the most pressured quarterback. But out of the 40 quarterbacks with at least 20% of dropbacks, he had the lowest pressures converted into sacks at 10.6%, which is unreal. And so if you're looking at sack numbers, it's like, well, he wasn't sacked a lot. This offensive line must be pretty good. And it's like, no, it's not to take away from the line, but it's guys were getting in. He was just making plays in the pocket. And that's one little piece, let alone, okay, the best aspect of the Bills' run game is, QB power and pin and pull with Josh Allen, or Josh Allen scrambling. Like, teams are afraid to play man coverage against the Bills because they don't want to be caught going downfield with their backs to Josh Allen, and then he breaks contain and takes off and gouges you for like 15 yards on a scramble. All of these pieces, all roads lead to Rome, but in this instance, all roads lead to Josh Allen, and it's become so dependent upon him. He is the easy button. He is the eraser. He is the magician in a variety of ways. And if he's not there, no disrespect to Case Keenum, but he can't do what Josh Allen does. So how does this offense change? Because you've got an offense that has been inconsistent in their run game, even though it's been better a bit at times, but you've got this offense that's changed from a run perspective the last several weeks. The first 5 weeks, weeks 1 through 5, the Bills are running gap scheme runs 28% of the time. Then in week 6, 50%. Week 8, 67%. And then this past week against the Jets, 47%. So changing their identity in the run game a little bit, and it's yielded more success, but not enough to be like, well, okay, Josh Allen's out, we can hang our hat on the run. You don't have that piece yet. And then you've had inconsistencies at the wide receiver position outside of Stefon Diggs. Dawson Knox has been up and down because he's been banged up. How does it change the execution of this offense? But I think more importantly, formations and personnel. Do they start to use more motion, something they haven't done a ton this year? They're 19th in pre-snap motion percentage. Do they build in some more stuff for Isaiah McKenzie and get some more designers or some more gadgetry stuff? Do you see more 21 personnel or 12 or 22 different formational looks to try and throw Minnesota off it all? Because you kind of have a blank slate because there's no regular season game tape for Case Keenum in this Buffalo Bills offense. Any way you slice it, it starts with Josh Allen, because if he plays, this offense relies upon him so much. So if he plays, is he healthy enough to be the unicorn and make unicorn plays, right? If he doesn't play, the nature and identity of this offense completely changes. It turns into, I don't want to say a more vanilla offense because that's not accurate, but it turns into more of, we have a regular guy at quarterback, so we have to do regular things. And then I think what's also interesting about that is, having Minnesota has a first-year head coach and Kevin O'Connell, and the Bills have a first-year OC and Ken Dorsey. You really get the opportunity to see what Ken Dorsey can do if he doesn't have Josh Allen. So what does he do for his first 15 in his scripted? What is he looking for? What is he trying to gather data on? What does he flip to later? What pendulum, does he swing? What dials does he turn up and down? And then what's even more interesting about that, like you mentioned, you've got a wily, savvy veteran of a defensive coordinator, and Ed Donatell on the other side, who his wealth of knowledge and experience, like, I think a lot of this game starts with, obviously, again, that Josh Allen piece. And if Josh Allen's not in there, if you're looking at it from a Minnesota Vikings perspective, do you, again, penny fronts, light boxes, more softer coverages traditionally from Minnesota on defense? If Josh Allen's not in there, do you expect more aggression in terms of how they play coverages or how they play fronts? Do you think it comes down to a little more of like, maybe we sense a vulnerability or some blood in the water and we start to change and attack a little bit more if Case Keenum is the guy?
I think it's interesting because obviously they played Taylor Heineke, who is a backup quarterback for Washington, with their starter hurt. And to me, the Vikings, it's not that I do think they did end up sending more pressure, but to me, it felt like, hey, we're more settled into this defense. We know how we want to match our routes, even though they're not really a match defense. Like we feel more comfortable about this, so we can send pressure. But the thing is, they get their pressure with 4 guys, right? Like I know we all remember the Rams and the Bills on opening night. Like the Bills ate the Rams up just by getting pressure with 4, right? And I don't think that Donatello at his core is I don't think he wants to send pressure, right? So to me, it's less about, oh, we're going to send a 5th guy, and more about, I guess I don't think they're going to come out of their light box, right? Like it's not like, oh, we're going to unfound our philosophy, right? Like I do still think that they should be, and I am very stressed about what Steph Diggs is going to do, right? Like Gabriel Davis is obviously a very good threat. And I think that what they've done against how many backup quarterbacks they've played is still keep their identity, because if the Bills are going to find a way to run for 250 yards, like, I don't know, I don't really see that happening, especially because the Vikings, I think, have done a good job fitting the run out of light boxes. So to me, I don't see them kind of unfounding things, particularly because they can get that pressure with 4 guys and do different things with Z Smith and manipulate it. And, I don't know what Kevin O'Connell, like what magic he has in his pocket that he has gotten so many teams who are so banged up. Of course, I keep saying this to myself, like no team is 100% at this point in the season, right? No team is 100% after the first day of training camp.
I was
right?
gonna say, that's the first hit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. It's unfair to think of teams like that, but like as you said, Josh Allen is the offense, right? So to be potentially missing that guy, like the Vikings are just they got some different level of luck that I do think that they're obviously going to take the game extremely seriously, right? If it's Case Keenum, like there's no reason that the Bills can't move the ball still and still score points, especially at home against a team who finds himself uneven at times. So I don't think they're going to unfound themselves. I think they'll probably keep a consistent pressure rate, kind of with what they've been doing. Some a little more creative things here and there, but I wouldn't expect seeing like max blitzes overnight by any chance.
Okay. And that's fair. I think too, if you point into the veteran presence they have in the coaching room, but also like on the actual roster, like the players on that defensive side, I think it lends itself to, we know who we are, we know what we do. Let's just lean into that, stay with our identity, because our identity is good enough to get it done. If we're playing our scheme and our structure to the best we can, then that's enough. And again, if you tie it in with just one of the pieces that I know we'll talk about as we continue to move forward here, like you don't really have to heat up too much against the Buffalo Bills, because you can probably just rush for when you've got Danielle Hunter and you've got Za'Darius Smith and some of the other pieces they have up front, especially considering what the Bills offensive line has been. So I think that's definitely, something to watch. And it makes sense for it to be, one of the top 3 matchups for both of us in this game from a scheme and structure perspective. Like, honestly, you could make the case that the Josh Allen piece is the biggest domino for this game. And you could make a case that it's like the number 1 matchup, because so many things, again, all roads lead to Rome, who is Josh Allen in this case. Like so many pieces and tangents and avenues and offshoots all stem from that source point. Oh, it's going to be something to watch for. And yeah, we both hope he plays, not just for the sake of us watching this game, but just for his career. You never want to see anybody go down or get banged up to a point that it impacts them, long-term. Whew.
Yeah, I do think like an important point, particularly for Vikings fans, earlier in the season, it's like they constantly see the 4-man rush, right? I think internally, like especially like I love Madden, even though I think it has so many problems, but like Correct. In Madden, right? When I play against my brother, like you just send a 5th guy, right? Like it's not that it's so much more complicated, but it really does a lot to unfound your coverage structures, right? Like if you're happy playing man coverage a lot or more often than the Vikings are, that the way that the Bills do, it's different than when you're the Vikings, who like we don't want to drain our coverage. We don't want to be playing, our kind of 3 deep, 3 under fire zones all the time. So sometimes it may just be that simple of, hey, we need to do something different to create pressure. But what I really like about the Vikings is the way that they create pressure is by putting Za'Darius Smith in different positions, right? And they have great players and they put him in great positions, right? So if you have a weak cog on your offensive line, and I think offensive line is such a kind of squeaky wheel system, right? Where if you have one bad one, like you want to have 5 kind of solid guys, but we're going to find them, right? Like Za'Darius Smith is going to be lined up over whoever you think your weakest defensive line is. And that's the way that they're going to create pressure, as opposed to, sending a linebacker or something and forcing really guys to be playing much more kind of like man match, or not man match, would be zone match technique, but in the way that they play their fire zones, in just a way that, I don't know, the way the modern football is continuing to go. Like sometimes you got to be happy rushing 4 and playing 7 in coverage. And look, sometimes the quarterback is going to win, and that's okay. And the Vikings mantra is, make him take another snap, make him snap it one more time, right? Like their thought is that over time, eventually the offense is going to make a mistake. Similar to the way the Bills, right, played the Rams in week 1. So I would imagine that there's some sort of similar kind of approach on defense, that the way the Bills were kind of attacking the Rams.
I love that piece you mentioned about like the front 4 aspect, because it seems like, again, modern NFL defenses, like it's trending in that way. And it makes sense. Like if you can get pressure with 4, that means you're dropping 7 into coverage, which means no matter what, you have the numbers advantage mathematically in coverage against the route distribution every single snap. Because the only thing the offense can do to max it out there is just block with their 5 offensive linemen, and then plus the quarterback, that's 6. That means you can only send 5 into the route distribution at best, which means you got 5 versus 7. And then you add in this nature of, okay, do we throw in some simulated pressures, and do we mug some gaps, and do we try and dictate protection a little bit? And can we get the offense to keep in a tight end or keep in a running back? Now, all of a sudden, there's 1 less in the route distribution because they had to keep a tight end in, or they had to keep a running back in. And now you have 7 versus 4, and you've almost got 2 defenders for every 1 player out in the route distribution. And it sounds so simple, but in a way it kind of is, like, but the way you get to that simplistic answer is complicated and requires a lot of puzzle pieces, but it's just math. At the end of the day, like, I've got more guys on this side than you have guys on that side, and my guys win because that we have more. Then if you start to add in, okay, some of those guys are a Patrick Peterson or a Tre'Davious White or a Harrison Smith or a Jordan Poyer or an Eric Kendricks or a Tremaine Edmonds or Matt Milano, and then that just gives you the higher advantage, period, because now you have the numbers advantage, but you also may have a quality player advantage. It makes sense if you can live in that world in today's NFL, which is designed to stop the pass. But the key piece, and you mentioned it earlier, and I mentioned it, in passing as well, the key things for both of these defenses is they can fit the run, or they have fit the run with these light boxes or using their front 4. And that, I think, gets lost for people because they don't recognize the relationship between coverage and the fronts. The only way you're able to play all those coverages on the back end and have numbers on the back end in coverage is because you can fit the run with light boxes. If you have to walk a safety down, or you have to switch out your nickel corner because you want to put in a 3rd linebacker to fit the run and run more base package and have more guys in the box, whether in terms of, changing personnel or just having pure numbers, that changes what you can do on the back end. And thus it makes you more vulnerable to certain coverages, certain routes and certain schemes and games on the offensive side. It all starts with what you can do up front. And Minnesota's been able to fit the run a bit, with those light boxes. And again, similar to the Buffalo Bills, yards, but not points. Bend, but don't break. Force the offense to beat you over and over and over. And when you've got really good players, eventually, you know what? Sooner or later, Za'Darius Smith is going to get you. Sooner or later, Danielle Hunter's going to get you. Sooner or later, Harrison Smith's going to make a play. Eric Kendricks is going to make a play. Jordan Hicks might make a play. And you're just playing those odds and playing those numbers. And again, it makes sense. This is what the modern NFL is.
Yeah, I think the light box point, it should be easier for Vikings and Bills fans to understand, I think, because that's really how our offenses kind of approach the defense, right? Like if you are going to be in too high, the Vikings more than the Bills, like they're going to run the ball, right? And if you find yourself against, especially in heavy personnel, when the Vikings get CJ Ham, their fullback, kind of H personnel on the field, they're just going to play action you to death. And they're more than happy to do that, right? So it's really just, we're going to give you these looks. And I think it was early on for the Bills versus the Jets, right? But get into that heavy set and just throw this like bomb play action to Diggs, where he had like the nice route on Sauce Gardner.
Yeah, it was the first play of the game.
Yeah, okay, I'm glad it was early. Yeah, it just makes sense. And I think one other thing I do want to talk about on the defensive end, just like from math it is important to think about, right? On the defensive end, a lot of times, like you want to have 3/2, like you want to be +1. If it's 3, you want to be 4/3, because that lets you do different things like in your match system, right? So we think of Palms coverage or like 2 read, where if you have the second receiver coming out, your cornerback can take that. He can leave the number 1 receiver to someone else, right? So having a +1 is a really good thing, right? And another way to kind of get that is I feel like I've like read this a few times where Josh Allen's like based a lot of simulate or like creepers are, I just use the word creepers more, where you're sending 4, but your 4th rusher is non-traditional. So it's like usually a linebacker comes and your defensive end drops out, right?
I
And
love
so the
that.
Vikings did
Simulated
that.
creepers,
Yeah.
whatever verbiage you want to use.
Yeah.
I think that's such a beautiful piece in modern day defenses in terms to dictate protection, but and be able to rush, but it's a safe form of that rush because you're not committing more than 4. So you still are able to drop 7. Granted, you're using non-traditional rushers, which means you're dropping a defensive lineman into coverage, and that may not be their forte. But if you have someone like a Za'Darius Smith who's athletic and you can drop him a little bit, then it starts to play to the hand a little bit. Sorry, I got excited. I love creepers.
You're good. Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good point. Like, I would rather drop Danielle Hunter. Like, I want Za'Darius Smith getting after the quarterback, right?
Yeah.
But it's a great point where it's like you send 4, and a lot of times teams do that. I think the Chargers do this pretty well. Like, if you can force the running back into coverage, now we have 6 guys blocking, still 4, and now we're only sending 4 outs out, right? So we're 3 over 2 plus 1, right? So if we have our deep middle of the field safety or even a linebacker kind of on the second level, or if it's just that, say you imagine you're 4-2, right? You're sending 3 of your linemen, one's dropping out, 1 linebacker's coming. I know the Fangio tree, they call it like a bonus hook, where you can just drop into a specific spot, right? Like in 3-by-1, really a lot of times offenses just kind of run stick, where that little kind of like out-ish route from number 3 is a difficult route for defenses to cover based on structure, right? There's no perfect defense. Every defense is going to have some sort of quote issue or a weak point, right? But if you can pick this guy and say, hey, we're going to drop into that spot, or we are anticipating this sort of route combination coming that way, it's a huge tool. And the reason why I took as much time on that is they did it a few times. I think may have been once only versus Washington. I wonder, were they just like saying, hey, let's test this out. Like, we're way more comfortable in our system. We absolutely have the players to be doing some of these more kind of not complex, but different sorts of pressures, non-traditional pressures. And, maybe it's something that we can use versus the Bills. I'm sure Danielle again was anticipating Josh Allen instead of Case Keenum, but it'd be something to see. The Vikings have such a huge stretch of games coming up, right? They got the Bills, Cowboys, Patriots, Jets, like where it's a good time for them, I think, to be kind of ramping up a little bit on defense. And the Bills, again, it's going to be a big test on Sunday. I'm sure we'll get some fun.
Yeah, I'm excited to see that piece. You and I both gravitate towards that chess piece action mixed within the violence of the game of football, and all of those things that we mentioned, right? All of it, everything we're talking about, especially from the Minnesota side of things on defense, light boxes and coverages and simulated pressures and creepers, so on and so forth, all of that. All of those dials individually get turned up or down based on who the quarterback is going to be. And everything that the Buffalo Bills do offensively obviously is tied to who that quarterback is going to be on Sunday. So again, it makes sense that he is our, Josh Allen versus his elbow ligaments is the matchup, the number 3 matchup for us heading into this week. Now we shift to the number 2 for each of us. I know mine is different than yours. I've kept mine hidden a little bit. I know what yours is. But let's dive into yours first. So, your number 2 top game deciding matchup for this Buffalo Bills Minnesota Vikings game.
Yeah. So I wrote it as Steph Diggs versus a Caleb Evans. It's not that simplistic, but it's more broader, like Steph Diggs versus the Vikings secondary, right? Because the Vikings don't play a defense where it's, hey, we're going to send one corner and follow this guy around. Really, like, no one kind of does that. Or teams do that in the NFL, but it's obviously much less popular. You have more ways to get out of it. But versus the Cardinals, for example, like a lot of times Cam Dantzler ended up lining it up across from Hopkins, and really anytime they were playing the quarter side of their quarter half, like Hopkins would get a 10 and out. And again, that's going to be open sometimes, right? Like every defense has its weakness. Offenses understand that. But so what are the Vikings going to do then against when Steph Diggs is lined up? I know the Bills love those stacks and different kind of things. One solution is like you cloud that receiver, right? You play your half side to that side, you have your cornerback playing underneath it, and you kind of trust your safety on the back end. Now with Josh Allen, of course, there was one just absurd throw late in the game to Diggs. I think it was late in the fourth quarter where it's like in this like weird hole of cover 2 that shouldn't exist. But if your arm is that strong, like it does.
You're an alien.
Yeah, right, exactly. Right. So, well, what does the Vikings defense do? Right? Are we just going to like devote our resources and play cover 2 to that side? That obviously will cause issues in different ways. But Caleb Evans was lined up against Terry McLaurin a bunch last week. I mean, he's a 4th round rookie. I think he's a 4th round. He's a great special teams player. Like, I do really like him. But you could line anyone up across from Steph Diggs, and you're gonna have like shaky knees, right? Like anyone should be nervous when you see that on the other side. And I do think that, it seems like Diggs and the Vikings have like a decent relationship, at least from interviews and stuff, but I'm sure he's ramped up a little bit extra. So Steph Diggs, particularly when he's lined up against Caleb Evans, same thing when he's lined up against Patrick Peterson, right? Like if they put him in the slot, or if he's kind of inside releasing on these stacks, like when when safeties have to carry him, like I think it's going to be a real chance for him to rack up a heck of a lot of yards. So it's going to be, what does the Vikings defense do to respond to that? Do we say, hey, look, like we're okay with this, right? In the sense of like, if he's going to have 100 yards but score no touchdowns, or, if he's going to get 10 catches and all of them are like 5, 6, 7, 8 yards, like I think the Vikings may be okay with that. But I'm sure that the Bills are going to dial it up as they should, right? Like NFL's a matchup league. And like, if you can win your matchups, you're probably going to win the game. And when you have a superstar like Diggs, it's just so fun to see Diggs and Jefferson. They're going to be playing obviously not on the same field at the same time, but kind of on both ends, and how important cogs in the offensive systems that they are.
Yeah, and it's even funnier too that like they are connected with one another. That trade that brought Diggs to Buffalo is the pick that went to the Vikings to bring Justin Jefferson to Minnesota. And I don't think so often, and not just in football, but in like sports in general, like it's very rare that like two teams do great on a trade. Usually someone's like, well, that team got fleeced. This worked out perfectly. Like Buffalo needed a ready, proven wide receiver who could help with the culture and the work ethic of the team and kind of mold this team, in addition to being a great player. And so the Bills got that. And then the Vikings are trying to retool, get some affordable talent that's young and rebuild this team and go in a new direction. And they got that. Like it worked out perfectly for both teams. It's so funny that, finally they get to, suit up, not directly against each other, but in the same game. Within the Stefon Diggs piece against this Minnesota Vikings defense, question that I do have for you. So this year, Stefon Diggs has been in the slot 39.4% of the time, which is up basically 18% versus what he was at in the slot last year in 2021, which was 20.9%, so roughly 21. And then in 2020, his first year in Buffalo, he was in the slot 31.5%. So any way you slice it, but especially compared to last year, he's in the slot much, much, much more than he was last year. Part of that is Cole Beasley being gone, injuries to the wide receiver position that they've had, along with some inconsistencies. If Stefon Diggs is used more into the slot, how do you think Minnesota responds from a coverage standpoint?
Yeah, so I think that one way to think about it is they keep their same structure. They have Chandon Sullivan and nickel, who I feel like, a lot of people don't love him, but the way that their kind of like quarter sides particularly works, like you can kind of have like a double team, like an inside out bracket. Like one way to think of quarters overall is that like the slot kind of has a bracket, in that the quarters flat player and that quarter safety are kind of a bracket in that way. I don't think they're going to like do anything crazy. Like I would be hard pressed to see them roll to cover 3 and have Harrison Smith coming down at him at full speed. I don't think that it's that. So they do have different coverages, but they just lock on the slot and just kind of keep him there. So I could definitely see them, clouding that side fairly often. So you keep that cover 2 side so that any kind of like quick rub or anything like that is going to get a cornerback in his face pretty quickly. But I definitely am concerned that the linebackers, they're going to have to carry like a lot of space. In my mind, of course, thinking about Josh Allen, like I just keep like watching the Jets game, like how many times they run like their outside vertical inside, like on a deep kind of flag. And like, if you're going to play a 4-2, like your linebackers on the weak side, they have to carry a lot of space, and that's hard. So I think that that's something you can do with Diggs in the slot. But, when I sit and think about it, it's like, well, you don't really have a good answer for this, right? Like it's really just on the defensive end, like, can we minimize them as much as possible, right? So to me, it's let's just put a roof over the head. And I hate saying it sometimes because it feels kind of defeatist, right? It's like, look, we are not going to stop them all the time. Let's just do what we can to limit them. But I really do think that's the right approach, right? Like I don't want to see them like have Patrick Peterson just follow him around the whole entire time and like be macho and say, no, we need to press them and kind of figure out
we're shutting them down. No quarter given.
What I would like to see them do is I know I was thinking about the Bills versus I think Kansas City last year, where like all of your different kind of cover 1 variations, shout out cover 1, where like if you're in a 2 high structure and your backside safety is coming down, right? Say you have Diggs in the slot to one side, and you call one cross, right? Like where your backside safety is coming down to kind of just rob him if he's coming across the field in any sort of way. Yeah, now the Vikings haven't like dug really deep into that. They did play some cover 1. They were like They played it against mesh a few times where the linebacker was kind of the one matching.
Yeah.
So you have to play your leverage in certain ways, right? Is it like, do we want to keep the nickel on the outside and funnel Diggs in a little bit to the safety? But look, he's going to get his yards, right? Like this, I like to think about it on the same way on the Vikings end. Like no matter what your plan is for Justin Jefferson, who's like, I think he's like second most average yards per game as a receiver, like in the NFL history, which is crazy. But like Diggs is going to get his, right? To me, it's more, well, is Gabe Davis also going to have 150 yards? Like we can't let that happen, right? Like if someone's going to go off a little bit, let's do what we can to keep him out of the end zone, kind of have our quote brackets, non-traditional brackets, really like zone brackets to just get multiple eyes on him. And keep that roof over the top of the offense, right? We don't want to have our offense kind of break that glass ceiling. So I keep like, I'm even thinking about it now more out loud. Like it's hard to just come up with a single fire answer, but a really easy way to deal with a lot of this is pressure the quarterback, right? Like if Z Smith is getting at the quarterback, particularly against Washington, there's a few snaps where you just see like Terry McLaurin, great receiver, he gets open, but the ball gets batted down at the line, right? Like all of us on the defensive end, like we won that snap, but someone was wide the heck open. So if they're wide open on third downs and the ball gets batted down at the line, right? Or Jesse Smith just getting in someone's face, or Danielle Hunter kind of get like forcing the quarterback off his spot. I think that's a good way of marrying your rush to your coverage and saying, hey, look, we're not going to be able to just outright stop Diggs, but we can do certain things, I think, to limit him and as a whole limit the offense.
That's very well said. And that's, I'm not going to spoil one of my points coming for later, but that's tied into one of my pieces for this matchup. Like if it is, because I think it is an advantage for Stefon Diggs against whoever's covering him for the Minnesota secondary. But if the matchup up front of the Minnesota D-line versus the Bills O-line is so heavily skewed towards Minnesota, like it was for the New York Jets this past week, what happens in coverage does not matter. Like, because Josh Allen or Case Keenum are not going to have the time to find those open receivers. And you see that, so much. We saw it a little bit, in the Bills-Ravens game. I think back to like Rashad Bateman got open a bunch and just Lamar had to scramble, or he was flushed, or he was getting brought down. Like, and you see that that's not unique to that one game. That happens like all the time. Fantasy football owners will know that. Like their guy is screaming down the field wide open, but the quarterback's getting brought down. You can't do anything about it. Like that's such a huge piece, right? Like, does the pass rush for Minnesota mitigate the disadvantage they have in coverage against Stefon Diggs? And I love that point from your perspective as well, because I think I've always approached that with like certain before everybody started squatting up in basketball. But like when you had like that one superstar, it was kind of just like, okay, like let so-and-so go out and get 35 and just limit everybody else and hold the team to 90. And it's similar with this. Like it's similar to what the Buffalo Bills did against like Travis Kelce. Kelce's going to get his, but you beat him up, you beat him to hell, and you try and limit everyone else. And then even if he finishes with 8 catches for 100 yards, but if they only put up 20 points, boom, you're good to go. And you beat the hell out of them while you do it. Limit that superstar, contain them. Von Miller said it so many times in interviews this year, like, you have so many great players in the NFL. You can't stop people. Like that's not happening. Like nobody's coming out and it's like, you know what? We're going to hold Justin Jefferson to 1 catch for 15 yards today. That's not happening. Like nobody is shutting, watch that happen now. Like, and everybody will be like, oh, you were wrong. But like the odds of you holding, especially in today's NFL that's so heavily skewed towards the offense, the odds of you shutting down a quarterback or a receiver in today's NFL, especially superstar level, it's so hard. And the odds of it happening aren't in your favor. And I also wonder how that plays into what we've seen on the Buffalo Bills offense in terms of who they're able to get the ball to, whether it's Josh Allen or even more so if it's Case Keenum. If Stefon Diggs gets bracketed, whether it's in the traditional sense, whether it's, rolling cloud coverage his way, whether they're putting him in the slot. And I love your point there of how the slot corner and the safety over the top and those 2 high looks almost forms like that natural bracket. Who steps up? Who is that consistent piece? And I also thought it was interesting in Minnesota is such a 2 high team this year. They played a ton of single high against Washington this past week, 44% in single high. A lot of it, cover 3 and then mixing in some cover 1. I don't think you see that against the Bills because I don't think the threat of the run is there to bring them out of those 2 high looks. And I think that's warranted at this point. So if Minnesota's sitting in those 2 high looks, you have a higher probability of being able to shift coverage towards Stefon Diggs somehow, some way, whether it's in, traditional double coverage sense, or again, or cloud covering, or just, brackets on the inside, whatever you want to do, whatever verbiage or kind of idea, at the end of the day, you can shift and roll coverage a little bit to Stefon Diggs, which means, shock, there's going to be one-on-one opportunities for somebody else somewhere who starts to eat, who steps up in some way. Everybody thought it was going to be Gabriel Davis. He's had some drops issues, just from this past week, but he's been that big play receiver. But all of a sudden, if the quarterback is Case Keenum, do you have a quarterback who can take advantage of that vertical piece? And then if everything is starting to live condensed, right? So much of today's NFL with creating space and creating explosives, it isn't necessarily getting over the top of the defense. It's running somebody through those zones and pulling those defenders and then running somebody back, like dagger concept. Beautiful. You pull somebody out and then that dig comes right in between, and all of a sudden there's 10 yards of space, 15 yards downfield. But it's all predicated upon that initial vertical receiver, that vertical presence, pulling that coverage out. If you're Case Keenum, or if you're the defense, are you really super concerned about that vertical route? Because are you like, I don't know if he's got the arm to launch this 40 yards over my head. Does everything start to creep up a little more? And now all of a sudden, an offense that's had issues finding rhythm the past couple of weeks because they don't have a natural pivot in the run game, and they've started to see inconsistencies and inefficiencies in their passing game in terms of their weaponry aside from Stefon Diggs. Even with Josh Allen, there's some challenges, but if it's Case Keenum, even more so, because you've seen struggles with these periphery weapon pieces with Josh Allen. But if it's Case Keenum, the field shrinks. Everything becomes more condensed. It becomes tighter. Things get squeezed because you're not going to have that threat of the big arm over the top. And when you're combining it with misexecution and mistiming, there is an opportunity for, I think, this Minnesota Vikings defense to mitigate the impact of Stefon Diggs by not having the threat of anyone else threatening them in this matchup.
Yeah, I think that one of my favorite points from that was like the verticality of offense, right? Like, I mean, I love basketball, right? Hopefully all of us love basketball. Like, you think of Steph Curry, like one of the coolest things he does is like he stretches the floor, right? Like there is more space for the offense to use than a team is used to, and that creates natural holes, right? Like, I think of Tyreek Hill as the equivalent to Steph Curry in the NFL because like the fact that he can get down so nice fast, comp. Like he stretches that. But Josh Allen does that too, right? In that he can make those throws. And well, when you have less, like the field is a little more condensed. And I really think of defense as like, you have to try and stop their best and you're just going to live with the rest. So I love Gabe Davis. Like I know that like that clip versus I think Kansas City, right, where he's running that kind of dino, like corner-ish post route, like he can shake, right? And I always think of drops as they're not like the stickiest stat. I don't think they have the most year-to-year turnover. Mm-hmm. It's like a visceral reaction to a drop, right? Because like when you see it happen, it's like, oh man, like come on, like I gotta call it that, which
and especially when it comes in a loss or a big moment, that's all you're focused on. And it's that visceral is the perfect word there. It's that emotional response to something that affected you emotionally, and then it causes you to react in such a manner that maybe put a little too much importance on that individual piece.
Yeah, and trust me, Gabe Davis can catch the football, right? Like he has caught a lot of footballs in his life. And so he is, again, he's someone who I personally like do respect as a player. And I think the Vikings should be concerned about that, right? Because you make a good point. Like, well, who's going to eat then, right? Because, I am intrigued by the Bills, like constantly increasing gap runs, because gap runs are just tough to stop. Like the way that modern defenses are played, they're obviously more attuned to fitting against zone runs, right? Like having guys kind of work in different gaps. But look, like it's hard to cover a gap when you have like two guys coming, slamming down, and you at a good angle, right? Yeah. Like the Vikings, like Dalvin Tomlinson, my guy, like he can play well against that. He's out, right? Like I know that the Lions had some success like in their gap run game against the Vikings. So I don't know, is that the answer? Like I was watching Case Keenum film, and I think it was the Browns against the Broncos, who Danielle would have been on their staff. And like, one way to like beat these two high teams is run them out the gym, right? Like if you can constantly get that. And look, I'm proud to say that I'm an analytics guy, just like everyone is, right? Everyone uses data of some sort, just like the numbers on the scoreboard is data, right? Nice. But like if a team can impose their will on the ground in a way that forces you to unfound your structure, and then you can kind of take advantage of that, like that is just so killer, right? Like if you have to roll someone else down just to stop the run, like you're like you're kind of cooked at that point, right? Because it opens up so much. But a lot of that is because Josh Allen is like Steph Curry in a lot of ways, and that he opens up so much. And can Case Keenum do that? I don't know. I certainly think he's a serviceable backup in the league. He's obviously played for the Vikings too, right? Like I'm happy for him to continue to get paychecks. Like shout out University of Houston. Like I love watching him play in college and everything. But it's obviously going to be noticeably different kind of with him there.
Yeah, and I think also I love the vertical stretch aspect you mentioned. There's also part of that stretch in terms of how you're able to stretch the intermediate, and whether that means because you're taking the top off or you're pulling the underneath coverage forward more. For people for a visual, think of, you go play action and those second level defenders come up and now there's this big void between the second and third level defenders. Part of the second level defenders holding so much and coming up forward in terms of holding, and not sinking or dropping too much is because of the threat of Josh Allen. Like, that's in the back of your mind. Like if he breaks contain and gets out, like we still have to be in this area. So especially when you pair the nature of that with these vertical concepts the Bills run, the intermediate becomes such an available space because the front has to respect Josh Allen so they can't drop too far. And then if the back end is getting pulled, all of a sudden you've got all that space in the intermediate. But if that vertical presence isn't there and the mobile presence of the quarterback is not there, again, life becomes harder and things start to shrink. And you talking about the run game, music to my ears. I continue to preach the message from the gospel of establish the run, that no matter what is happening with the pass first nature of today's NFL, you need that pivot in the run game. You have to make defenses honor that aspect. Otherwise, they're just going to sit in these two high shells and put a cap on what you're able to do, and they're going to keep everything in front of them, and they're going to force you to dink and dunk and beat them with death by 1,000 cuts. And they're going to play the odds and the probability, which is we don't think you can consistently string together 12-play, 6-minute, 72-yard drives. We think the higher probability of us losing deals with you creating explosives somehow. So what we're going to try and do is we're going to take away those explosives and or limit them and make you play efficient football up and down the field. That's the world that the Buffalo Bills are going to have to live in if Case Keenum is that guy. And again, everything just becomes tighter. And I'm very interested to see how that impacts Stefon Diggs and how the Bills respond in general. So very good. Number 2 point from you. So my number 2 ties into your number 1. So we can make this a larger scale conversation. I have the Minnesota Vikings interior offensive line against the Buffalo Bills pass rush. So I noticed some things in watching. How many Minnesota Viking games have I watched? 3 full games on tape, including this Washington game. But for whatever reason, the Washington one really, we were talking about it offline. I think it's like second play of the game, Ed Ingram just gets worked on a run. And I kept, as the game went on, Ed Ingram and Ezra Cleveland and focusing on them just not looking great, especially in pass protection. And so I was like, let me look at some numbers because I'm interested to see what they look like. Ed Ingram, for all offensive linemen, has given up the most pressures in the entire NFL at 31 pressures. And he's allowed 7 sacks, which is the most for guards and second amongst all interior offensive linemen. Ezra Cleveland, the other guard, the left guard, has given up the 10th most pressures amongst all offensive linemen and the third most for guards. So 2 of the top 3 guards in terms of pressures given up reside in Minnesota playing for the Vikings. And I think of that match, I'm like, okay, this screams advantage Buffalo Bills. With Daquan Jones and Tim Settle and Ed Oliver and Jordan Phillips and the rotation that they have on the interior, the hockey line style type of wholesale changes that they're able to execute, they're going to be able to stay fresh. They're going to be able to vary their attack. They can vary their fronts. They can do a variety of things, right? But I also thought that advantage existed last week against the New York Jets with how banged up the interior of their offensive line was, and we didn't see it as much. Now, granted, there was a different style of attack in terms of leaning on the run and leaning on that gap scheme piece, but I'm focused on that interior because it has been a bit of a weakness for this offense. And part of me thinks that I know they have been bad, but everybody has a weakness in some way. Just like you said, every defense has a weakness. And when you have an offense with 2 pretty good young tackles and then a stud running back and stud wide receivers, and now I would consider TJ Hockenson a stud tight end who, again, played fantastic versus Washington in his debut. A lot of nuance in his routes and athleticism, things that we've become accustomed to seeing from him. But how does that offense function, and how do the Buffalo Bills attack this offense? Because everything screams vulnerable on the interior. And it showed up time and time again against Washington. Now, Washington's front is nasty. They were top 2 going into this past week in rush DVOA. They were number 2. The secondary has been a bit up and down, but that front is nasty. And that's without Chase Young being healthy. The Buffalo Bills front has been the key to this defense the entire year. The injuries that they've had on the back end, starting with Tre'Davious White being out for the majority of the year to start, Micah Hyde going down, Jordan Poyer being up and down. They've had some injuries at the second level. All of it has been centered on 2 things: their ability to rush the quarterback with just 4, so they can drop 7 into coverage and get pressure with 4 and get home with 4, but also their ability to fit the run. So much of this game on that side of the ball for me stems from that interior matchup, because the Bills lost on the interior against the Jets. And this also, again, ties into the other piece that I have. The Jets used a lot of gap scheme, right? Just traditional pin and pulls, counter tray, some power, single puller, sometimes double, just doing a variety of things in that piece. But what they were doing was using the Bills' one-gapping nature and that upfield presence, using it against them. Similar to what the Indianapolis Colts did last year in that game in Buffalo, letting the Bills get upfield and just being like, okay, cool, you're going to do that. We're just going to let you get upfield, and then we're going to run right behind you in that gap that you just created. Or the Bills were using run stunts or run blitzes, depending on whatever verbiage you want to use. And sometimes it was just bad luck. Like they're running a stunt to the side that the pin is coming from. So all of a sudden you just slanted and made yourself easier to pin down. And now you're completely washed. And there's a huge gap that James Robinson is running through with a puller leading him through. And you got a hat on a hat. Not to mention the pre-snap motion that we saw from the Jets and the Packers, where this Bills defense, again, I think it's pretty understood at this point, with being a zone defense and being with the light boxes, if you run that jet motion pre-snap, they give that push call, they shift a little bit. Now all of a sudden, you've got 6 in the box against 6 blockers. And some people might think, oh, well, that's 6 on 6. But that's not what it is, because if you've got 6 blockers, if you've got 5 offensive linemen and a tight end, so you're 6 on the line, that means there's 7 gaps. So if you only have 6 defenders, that's 6 defenders for those 7 gaps. Now, if you start using pullers and down blocks, you're adding and removing gaps. And so if you're shifted to the wrong side, or you don't beat your man and you lose one-on-one, all these vulnerabilities and areas of opportunity for the offense start to get created against you. But like we mentioned earlier, the Minnesota Vikings, heavy zone team, 79% zone run rate on this year, which is the second most in the league. Do they lean a little bit more into some gap scheme pieces and take advantage? Can the Bills outmuscle them and beat them up one-on-one, whether it's in zone or whether it's in gap, and win on the interior, considering that's where the vulnerability is for this offensive line? Again, I think so much of it starts with that piece against the run, where they've been stronger, right? Ed Ingram and Ezra Cleveland, like you mentioned, they've been better in the run than they have in the pass. But then when you tie it to the pass, are you able to eat up front on that defensive line? I think that's where it all starts for this matchup. And I know you feel similarly, considering that, a little spoiler, this is your number 1 matchup.
Yeah, I think this specific point ties into a lot of points that I think we've made today. Like, your coverage is going to be made easier if your pass rush is at a high level, right? Yes. Like, it just takes stress off the back end. And I think a little earlier in the season, Cousins was pressured on, so also just some blitzes in general, right? Like, send 6 and let's play man behind it and let's see what he can do. And because they didn't have TJ Hawkinson, Adam Thielen was banged up, right? Like, if coverage was rolled to Justin Jefferson and then other places, they just weren't really able to take advantage of it. I love the addition of Hawkinson, because I think that gives them a piece to win in kind of man coverage looks.
Yeah.
And, obviously I know Ed Ingram gets a lot of flack. He plays right guard, and I think it's going to be a long Sunday for him. I love that you mentioned the kind of hockey line. And I think it's cool that, like, on the defensive end, like a cornerback, right? If when a receiver runs a streak down the field, he can go take a break. The cornerback's not really going to take a break, right? Like, the right guard is not going to take 10 pass reps and then go off to the sideline.
He doesn't get a snap off.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you can't do that, right? That's not what happens.
He doesn't just get to put his hand up and be like, "Oh, I need a breather." Like, that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and it's even harder that, the Bill guys are also good too, right? And so I think that so much comes down to this. I don't think the Vikings are gonna pull a gap scheme out of their hat, right? Like, I've seen them run counter a few times. Like, I've seen people get their feet kind of tripped up. Their main gap scheme it's duo, right? So it's inside zone ish, right?
I was gonna say, yeah. So it's basically almost like inside zone, so it doesn't even count.
Yeah, right. So it's kind of in that realm. And so I don't think that the Vikings want to win on the ground like in this matchup. I think they want to maybe they can get into heavier personnel, just like see what the defense does, right? Can we play action out of heavier personnel? Or like, can we activate Justin Jefferson, right? Like if we're going to force you to decide how you'll deal with that. And all the stuff on the back end, like, okay, if you double Jefferson, like, can we get Hockenson another way? That doesn't matter if we can't protect up front.
Yeah.
Right. So I wouldn't anticipate the Bills sending tons of pressure because they don't have to.
Correct.
And so what was really encouraging against Washington is I actually think Kirk Cousins just played great last week. Like, I think he has been improving. And, you know, type his name into Twitter. You can see like all the like Kirk Cousins chain stuff. It's hilarious.
It's awesome.
But it's encouraging because he'll take shots now, right? Where I think earlier on, or like game one, or not game one, more like game two, like he just wasn't throwing those down the field one-on-one balls. And, you know, he threw up one to Justin Jefferson, which I think was the right decision. It ended up getting picked, you know, like the ball sometimes will bounce kind of out of your hands. Yeah. But it's going to be really cool because, okay, I like part of my piece that I wrote this week is, well, Kirk Cousins did really well against pressure. Are you going to be able to do it again? Right? Like pressure rates, I think, are not the most like sticky thing, right? Like your performance against pressure, it can be more volatile, right? Against the Eagles pressure a lot. This is earlier in the season, you know, I think Cousins he's like 9 weeks into a new offense, right? Like I know we think, oh, you played with O'Connell in Washington. Like this is a new offense, right? Like this is like you're starting a new job. It's not just like the same exact thing, right? So it's obviously the Vikings interior offensive line versus the Bills pass rush. But Cousins, last week, like he wasn't taking advantage of the rush, but like he was just throwing dimes to people in his face, right?
And I think to show that late in the fourth quarter, he takes that shot and throws a gorgeous ball. The one that he misses the next play. Yes, but the route is good. The throw is picture perfect. Drop it in the bucket. He had a couple throws earlier too where pressure's coming, but he's just sliding, and he's layering over the second level defenders. There were like 3-4 plays that I have marked to clip and post to Twitter because I was like, these are good throws.
Yeah, like he's a really good quarterback, right? I love Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, right? Like obviously you love those guys, and unfortunately for that kind of next tier of players, like they get looked at so differently because they're not like the super alien, right? Like no, Kirk Cousins cannot like expose the defense in the same way that Josh Allen can, obviously on the ground, and then like with the same verticality. But I think Kirk Cousins is still a top 10 quarterback, right? And like what I love about Cousins is I think that he knows what he's good at, and I think he knows what he's not good at, right? Like he was talking about it in one of his post games, but like after every throw, like he knows that he has to throw it and kind of duck out of the way, right? He knows that he's a little bit slighter frame. He is not going to be able to take the same sort of punishment as Josh Allen, and that is okay, right? Like that is something that we're all going to have to live with. But I was surprised with his play versus Washington because I usually see him as kind of like in the middle, like he's a professional B+ quarterback. He can get to that A- level, but he's stringing some good weeks together, right? And so if he can, again, it's not erase the interior offensive line issues because like what are you going to do when Von Miller has a hand in your face, right? Like you're not going to be able to throw like a perfect throw every time, but if you can do that well enough, I think that's so demoralizing for a defense, especially if you're sending pressure. Like if you're like, because defensive coordinators, they don't dial up max pressure all the time, right? Like if they do that and the offense is still succeeding, and I love like if you can ever watch like Kevin O'Connell, like his sideline kind of mic'd up stuff, like he sees, obviously I think he's very good at his job. He sees what's going to happen before it happens, right? Like he knows because he designs it very well. Like that particular play, like it's a slot fade, right? Like Justin Jefferson in the slot has so much room to work with. And like all Cousins has to do is lay the ball out there, and he can do that, right? So if their timing is good, now he's taking more chances. Does it lead to an interception here and there? Like I'm fine with that, right? Like if the Bills are get an interception on Sunday, but Cousins is pushing those safeties even further back, and like you said, kind of opening up intermediate areas, especially for Hockenson, like maybe it's just me coping with it and saying, you know, we can overcome the interior offensive line issues, or we can deal with that pass rush. My concern would be is if the pass rush kind of forces us into quick game all the time. The quick game's all fine and dandy, but like I just don't love watching it all the time. You see the Chargers, right? Like they're running stick every 5 other snaps, right? Now,
and the way they run it too is even worse. It'll be like 3rd and 5, and they're literally running it for like 5 yards. Like they don't run it like, oh, it's 3rd and 5, but we're gonna run it at 8. And they're like, nope, we'll run it at 5, and then catch it like 4 and get stopped.
I always see the joke where people are like, oh, like Kirk Cousins needs 8 and takes 2, or like he's a dink and dunk guy. Like he wasn't that against Washington, right? Like he did, threw one underneath pass, but like it's again, I want people to hear the optimism in my voice because I think he's playing well, right? And I think he should be praised for that because I think he's fitting into the system well. I think O'Connell pushes him to make some of those decisions and be a little more aggressive. Like, yeah, you want to throw the ball up to Justin Jefferson, right? Like, I can think about offense and defense as much as possible, but it's kind of a simple game sometimes, right? Like the best scheme is let's throw the ball to our best player. And that obviously that dumbs it down a lot. Yeah. But the Vikings know how to get Jefferson in those situations. So I know this started with hey, well, how's the Vikings offensive line going to do against the Bills pass rush? Like, well, if Cousins can play so well under pressure, like some of that issue certainly can be mitigated because the Bills are going to get some sacks on Sunday, right? Like, I just don't think there's any way around it. I think that it's obviously going to be difficult to, line up one-on-one, or even if you slide your center in certain ways against that unit, and especially if they're staying fresh. But I think that I like the Jets. They had different screens. I think one of the touchdowns may have been on a screen. The Vikings, O'Connell does love calling screens. Like there's a screenshot from the Eagles game where he says call screens early and oftener. That might be
yes. Yeah, you're right.
He likes screens, right? And there haven't been great in this screen game. I think that is of course one way to kind of slow up defensive lines in some ways, and like whams and traps and things like that. That's just not what the Vikings do. No. So obviously styles make fights, and it's unfortunate that I was watching the Jets offense and was like, oh, like their offense is kind of more better designed than ours, but they obviously don't have the same sort of threats, and their quarterback is a little different. So on the Bills defensive end, I've said a few times, I want to keep coming back to it. You don't have to be stressed about motion in the same way. And man, the Jets running counter so much. So I don't anticipate that from the Vikings. I mean, look, if they can run it and it works, I would love to see it. We haven't seen it yet this year. So it's can we hook and zone sometimes, but really they're just trying to set up the pass, right? Like that, and that's what I think they should do. And is it Kirk Cousins throws the ball 50 times? I don't know, maybe we don't love to see that, but that might be the kind of game it is on Sunday, especially if the Bills are continuing their hey, the best defense is us just scoring more points than you, right? At the end of the day, it's just about who scores more points. And the Vikings aren't hey, we're going to hang 35 on you. They can be. I really do think they can be. They haven't been. And a lot of it is because this interior offensive line issue where look, if you have a sack on a drive, your score rate is just, it just sinks. Yeah. Right. And it's so deflating. If you run the ball on first down, you try and set something up on second down. And then now we're looking at 3rd and 15. I don't know. You don't have any plays kind of called. Yeah.
Not everybody's built to beat that. That's hard.
Right. Yeah. No one is, right? As they should, right? Defenses are going to kind of constantly put a ceiling over you. Yeah. But I don't know, man. I have optimism for the Vikings offensive line. They've been a relatively healthy unit. Their center got hurt last week. I think he missed 2 snaps, but they've had the same 5 guys kind of pretty much every snap of the season, which is awesome, right? That is something you love. And it is, I think every 4 weeks it's a new season, right? Can this be a point where they are turning around and figuring out Ed Ingram, feels his body, feels his feet a little better. Sometimes I think maybe his issues is in setting his base. But also, I don't know, he lets up a sack against JJ Watt, oh no, JJ Watt, the Hall of Famer, beat us on a sack, right? These things are going to happen. I think it's how can Kirk Cousins, maybe now he's just more comfortable with that, right? Where he's he knows where it seems maybe his clock is sped up, but his feet aren't. So it's he is processing things at the same time, but it's just all happening quicker, partially because of smoothness. And that's another really cool thing about football, right? On my 15th tangent of this one rant is the different things that the different puzzle pieces that are falling in line for the Vikings. They're 7-1 and probably shouldn't be 7-1, but that they're still kind of putting things together. And Cousins, I think, is improving. And it's something that's cool to see, that will hopefully be obviously successful for the purple on Sunday, but is the Bills can really just really flummox and really kind of suppress that with just 4 guys that can get after the quarterback.
And see, I wonder how that comes about. Does it even get to a point where the pass rush can get home, or the pass rush can take advantage of the interior for Minnesota if Minnesota's cooking with the run game, and it's well, we've run it 11 times so far in the first quarter and a half, and we're averaging 7.5 yards a clip. Do we just keep running it? And now the Bills have to commit a safety down, and now that play action comes into play. And now, they're, like you mentioned earlier, even though they haven't been great at it, so 12% design rollout, fourth highest in the league. Or all of a sudden we run in some boots and some nakeds, and Kirk Cousins has a clean, he's not a threat to run, but he's got a clean, landscape in front of him, and he can figure out where he wants to go. And now you've got, it's zone coverage from the Bills, but because it's single high, you have more of a one-on-one type of feel to it. And can you affect those seams with Justin Jefferson? And all of a sudden, are you the prototypical play action boot shot that zone offenses take, where they're just running that deep over, is all of a sudden that available to Justin Jefferson, and that space is available in that intermediate. I think it stems from that. So the interior play is the focus of mine, but can it even get there is like a bigger question that I have, right? Because if the Jets, again, I don't want to keep coming back to one game, but it's 17-17, and the Bills punt the ball down, and the Jets are on their own 4, and they run it just 7 straight times right down the Bills' throat. And some things, again, were, some guys fall into one another and a hole opens up, but it was schemed up initially and fit well from a defensive perspective, and sometimes things happen. But the Bills are throwing a lot of things, and you mentioned earlier, like when you start to throw different things, if it's like you were using it in the sense of like, these max blitzes, but when you're starting to throw everything in the cupboard at an offense and they just keep like beating it, then you're just like, dude, like, what the hell? Like, I've thrown everything. Like, I've broken the glass in case of emergency, and I used Mighty Mouse, and he ain't doing anything, and I'm still getting gashed. Like, do we even get to the point where, okay, it's 3rd and 8. Let's see if the Bills pass rush can get there. Or is Minnesota living and it's 3rd and 4, 3rd and 3, 3rd and 5 at most, and then it's like, well, they could really do anything at this point, or they can go quick game and you don't have to worry about the pass rush. Like, for me, it starts with how the Bills play the run, given that Minnesota is a good running team and can affect you with the run, but then has these pieces on the outside that can affect you and impact you. And then this vulnerability in the middle that you necessarily can't expose unless you can get them into these passing situations where you can attack that spot. Because a weakness is only a weakness if you can force it and get to that spot. They're weak in pass protection. Cool. What happens if they don't have to pass? Then that weakness is useless.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, like, so my brother, when we play Madden, he plays as the Browns because like Nick Chubb is the highest overall running back, and he just runs all over me, right? And like, it's super frustrating.
It's so frustrating. I want to throw my controller through the TV.
So the Bills, right? They play their nickel, like they're gonna play light boxes. The Vikings run the light boxes, like they're going to run on a lot of first downs, and like versus Washington, like those are just burn plays. Like, they just waste him, and you don't have to. I know it's maybe counterintuitive. Like, you don't have to run for 150 yards to have an effective play action game, right? Like, human stimuli, like natural response as a linebacker, when you see people running at you, you're going to respond to that.
Especially for a Bills defense, like the linebackers aren't coached to, sit in the grass. Like, they're taught to play the run first. So if you show that run action, they will honor it. At the very least, take a couple steps. So you're going to get some sort of action from them.
Yeah. So, and I know that I think O'Connell has like a pretty high, like early down play action rate, which that's actually more of what I'd like to see, right? Is I would like to see them the Vikings get into heavy personnel. And if the Bills stay in nickel, okay, well, let's run the ball. But if we can get into, like, if we can stay kind of in 11, like you can run your play actions out of that, right? And I do think that should frustrate the defensive line at least a little bit. And like, linebacker is so hard, right? Like, you are asked to do so many things so fast, so violently, and you literally have to like run up and cover the run and then get all the way the heck back and cover it like some 4-5 guy running a deep crosser, right? So like, let's make life hard for the people whose life is already hard kind of on the offensive end, especially I think some injuries back there too. And like, I can't imagine the Vikings would just like run over the Bills. Like, I think it may just be my pessimism in like running the ball in general, but I just don't love how the Vikings have approached it. Maybe more, but I think that's more of my distaste of like, how many times do I have to watch a first down run, which that's not a nuanced view of the whole entire like run scheme, right? Like, a lot of the times,
see enough and it's like 2nd and 7 after each one, you're like, son of a, like, you're just annoyed at it.
I think that's the same visceral response, but it's an issue in zone run a lot of times where like, if one key block is off, or if the defensive line has a technique to kind of like cause a seat in one of those spots, like, it's going to be a nothing burger run. Yeah. And so like, it is not easy to make every single block on a run look perfect. Right. And like, if it is, and you can like get your hat across and like have the right leverage, what was it, like 5-6 yards. So obviously, if it was me, I would just like run a pass play every single time. Just kidding, that's not what I would do. But the way that the Bills play defense will encourage the Vikings to run, and if they can run and force the Bills kind of out of their base or their nickel, like I think the game's over at that point, right? Like if you can do that, like that is such a big problem, right? The same way on the opposite end, like if the Bills can do that to the Vikings, and really like every single game that you watch across the league, if a team can force a defense into too high, not even with how many yards it is, like if it's with personnel, right? If it's with different kinds of motion, right? Or versatility, the way that the 49ers have a player that can play every single position.
Anything
like
you can do, anything
right?
you can do to make that safety have to spin down. Anything you can do to get him out of that too high.
Exactly, right? Like it just opens up space for your receivers, right? And like it is such a star-studded league at the receiver position where like if you're in one high, you might die, right? Like you don't want to be in that kind of position. So I'll be curious to see if either teams like you don't need to establish the run. Like you don't have to spend your whole entire time trying to force them into one high, because like two high structures have weaknesses too, right? Particularly those like if you're playing in quarters, that's the easiest way to think about it. Like that quarters flat defender against a slot receiver, like that's not an easy job at all, right? Like
all day.
Yeah, exactly, right. Like you're 1 year in conflict, but then also receiver like usually has like a two-way go of a certain kind of way, and like that is obviously the weak point of the defense, where there's so many strong points of it in other ways. And yeah, I'm curious to see like how much are the Bills just kind of like play their man coverage, and like I think the Vikings would be happy to see that, particularly again the way that Kirk Cousins played against it last week. Maybe not happy to see it, but like, okay, are you gonna really have like one guy on Justin Jefferson? Like, probably not, right? And like, even if you are, if you're gonna push your safety over, like, I think Hawk is gonna be open, and like, he's so unique, but he's gonna be, I think, fun to watch kind of in this one too.
Yeah.
And I'm sure this week he'll know the snap count a little better, which like, he's got a week playing in the offense.
But he looked good in that game against Washington, like you mentioned. He had a route early. Oh, it's just an inbreaker, and he gets to 10. And he breaks down and gives the slightest little head fake to the left, and it freezes the safety, and he bangs it back inside, and he creates like 4 yards of separation just off the break. And I was like, whoa. And then he just kept eating and kept eating. And yeah, it's what you can create with those easy buttons. Like if things are looking complicated and all of a sudden you notice that your stud wide receiver or stud tight end is in one-on-one coverage, okay, cool. Like maybe it's not high percentage, but I'll throw the ball up to my sweet guy and hope that he can go make a play. And sometimes they go and make a play, or the defender doesn't play it right and the flag gets thrown, and that works just as good as a completion. Like the odds are still in your favor if you can work that. And yeah, it is funny, like with that nature, but it all comes down to, can you get defenses out of that too high look and that structure? And the biggest thing for me, I always think of it in two ways. You can either attack them where they're trying to protect. The example I always use for this is in The Office, when Michael Scott is dating Pam's mom and she doesn't want him to. And then he's like, you know what? I'm just going to date her harder. So if defenses are trying to put the top on your defense, right? If defenses are trying to put the cap on the offense, attack them more vertically, press harder downfield, pull them out and create that space in those voided areas, and then work some more routes back in there and then hit them in the intermediate. Or if you have someone like Gabe Davis, who has been successful splitting two high looks and still being able to get vertical, cool. Attack them where they're trying to protect. Or like you mentioned, you can run them out of that look, whether it's with literally running the ball, or if you're using more 12 personnel or using more pro personnel, either 21 or 12. And the defense is like, you know what? This is a heavy run formation type of look. We got to bring a safety down, even if it's not a full safety commit to the box, but it's one of those, like they're trying to split the difference. And maybe they drop back into a too high look, but initially they're not there. And so you have an opportunity for leverage based on spatial awareness and spatial ability in the route distribution. All of those things, you got to find some way to get the defense out of their comfort zone. And I think for the Bills offense too, if we flip it like to that other side, like they've struggled with the run. So the odds of them being able to pull the defense out of too high to make them respect the run is lower than I think from the Minnesota standpoint, where you've got a very legitimate running back and a successful ground game. And then all these things start to domino effect and impact things. So yeah, huge matchup. Your number one, my number two, my number one. And I think it makes sense given the Josh Allen injury, given what we just saw against the New York Jets. This is not a reactionary piece for me. So, my number one matchup is the Minnesota Vikings defensive line against the Buffalo Bills offensive line. That Minnesota Vikings, I should say their front as a whole. this isn't just a reaction to this past game against the Jets and the potential Josh Allen injury that we're seeing and reading and hearing all these rumors about. Again, like I mentioned, Josh Allen was the most pressured quarterback in the entire NFL last year in the regular season, second most if you include the postseason. Now, yes, some of that from a volume standpoint is because, well, like they pass a ton, and if you pass a ton, you're probably going to get pressured more. Again, it makes sense, correlation and all that kind of stuff. But so much of their pass protection game last year, and even this year to a degree, was like, it's okay, Josh will make something happen. And I just felt that piece was unsustainable. So asking him to be Batman over and over and over again was too much of an ask, not just for him, but for anybody. Like, to ask somebody to be that on point that much, it's a very hard thing to do in the professional world of the NFL when you have professionals who are also good at their job on the other side of the ball trying to attack you and get you out of those, comfort spots. The Bills have struggled traditionally against higher end talent of players up front. At best, I think as a group, they're a middling offensive line. Like, they're not the worst line in the league. They're also not a top 10 league. Most weeks they're anywhere from like 13 to 18, but they will have more moments where they creep into the mid 20s than weeks where they creep into the top 10. And you're coming off a week where Quinnen Williams had himself a day. Bryce Huff had a good day. Jonathan Franklin Myers was a monster. Carl Lawson looked good. And now you come into a game where the Minnesota Vikings, and I feel like this isn't too known, I would say even league-wide, but especially amongst Bills fans, Za'Darius Smith and Danielle Hunter. I think more people know Danielle Hunter because he was a potential trade target for a lot of Bills fans this offseason. Danielle Hunter's having himself a year, right? He's tied for 14th in pressures. He has 5 sacks. He's playing the run well. He's long. He's physical. He's violent, fun, awesome. He's good. He's kind of the number 2. Because the number 1 is Za'Darius Smith, who leads the entire NFL in pressures, not just amongst edge defenders. Every single player in the NFL, he leads the entire NFL in pressures according to PFF. He's tied for 3rd in sacks with 8. And now you might also be saying, yeah, but you know what? He probably gets a ton of pass rush snaps. That would be false. He's 38th out of 200 defenders in pass rush snaps. So he's efficient with what he's doing. Then you also add in the other pieces, like you mentioned, of how they use him, and they'll line him up in the A gap. They'll line him up over the guard. They'll flex him late. They'll drop him into coverage, all these different chess pieces. He also, for somebody, I love it when good pass rushing edge defenders also play the run. And he had multiple snaps against Washington. And this isn't unique to his time in Minnesota. He did it in Green Bay as well. He'll get upfield so hard, and then it turns out to be a run, and he just plants that foot in the ground and spins back and gets back to his gap, and he makes the tackle for like a 1-yard gain or a 2-yard gain. He plays the run hard, as does Danielle Hunter. And Hunter's got that length and that size. Smith is a big guy as well, but I think he plays the run with just more of a motor and a speed and a tenacity, and he also uses that in his pass rush. And both he and Hunter, they've got hand technique. They've got the proverbial, like, beat the hands, beat the man type of moves. Za'Darius Smith has a variety of spin packages that he can use on you and rip and bend, convert some speed to power. Danielle Hunter can use that length and that long arm, but he's still athletic for a lanky, bigger guy. The Bills have struggled with premier types on the defensive line, not just this year, but these past several years. And they're coming off a week where they did not look good, particularly on the interior. But nonetheless, you had some reps where Deion Dawkins got beat. You've had issues at right tackle the entire year. Spencer Brown, if he plays, he's been practicing this week. Maybe he plays. He's still on that roller coaster in his second year. Sometimes you're like, oh man, look at this guy. And then other times he dips and you're just like, oh man, like, look at this guy as he gets worked. Quisenberry got beat by Bryce Huff on the hit that injured Josh Allen's elbow. This defensive line on the outside is threatening. And then you take the pieces on the inside. I already mentioned Harrison Phillips, who Bills fans are familiar with. I also like Jonathan Bullard. Like, I like what he does. I like how he plays with leverage. He's a big dude, like, which again, most dudes are in the NFL, but he doesn't play high. He doesn't come out of his stance and stand straight up. He plays with lean. He plays with leverage. He uses his hands. They have a good front. And again, if we're into this world where if the Bills can't run and, okay, now they have to put more onto the shoulders of Case Keenum, do Hunter and Za'Darius Smith eat? Or again, even if it's Josh Allen, okay, the Jets got the Josh Allen last week. And I think Quinnen Williams, obviously he's on the interior. Quinnen Williams is a stud. The Vikings have 2. Like, Za'Darius Smith is very, very, very real. I feel like people don't know it. If you asked 10 people, who leads the league in pressures, I don't think one of those 10 is saying Za'Darius Smith. I do not think that. I think they're going with, okay, Max Crosby, Aaron Donald, maybe somebody says Quinnen Williams because he's a New York guy and everybody, that media market gets tons of coverage. Za'Darius Smith is a hell of a player, having a hell of a year, and they're a nice 1-2 punch, and then you add the functional rotational pieces they have on the interior. That's where my head is focused on this game, because in both the pass and the run, right? Because again, the Vikings are light boxes 73% of the time, the most in the entire NFL as a whole. They're in, again, as a whole, 73% light boxes, but then against the run, 29% light boxes, which is the fourth most. If they can fit it with just the front four and then having their two linebackers, if they want to rock those penny fronts, like Green Bay did as well, how does that Buffalo offensive line gel? How do they handle if they start to run some games, if they start to run some simulated pressures or some creepers, if they start to mug gaps with Kendricks and Hicks and then they drop them out? Is the interior committed? And then you're putting your tackles on islands. I think this matchup sets the tone for everything for the Buffalo Bills offense. I recognize the secondary pieces and the matchup of Stefon Diggs against the Vikings secondary, which I think is advantage Stefon Diggs. But like I mentioned earlier, that doesn't come into play if you got to get the ball out in like 2.1 seconds because that pass rusher is getting home, or Josh Allen or Case Keenum constantly are getting pushed off their spot because Za'Darius Smith is slicing inside, or you're getting pressure on the interior. Like, there's a lot of ways in which this Vikings defense up front can affect the Bills offense. And again, they have to, because they're a 4-man rush team, because they're a light box team. And just for numbers too, to put in perspective, they use 4-man rushes 80% of the time, which is, ranked as 6th most in the league, but it's the same percentage as the Buffalo Bills. And all Bills fans know how much they rush for. We keep talking about it, the parallels and the similarities. The Vikings are a very similar defense overall, but especially in that front, same goal, same mind, too high, light boxes, rush with 4, fit with the front in those light pieces. There's some horses up front, and the Buffalo Bills coming off a game where one horse in Quinnen Williams and a bunch of good B-plus players caused havoc. Now you're playing a front that has a defensive line with several B to B-plus players and then 2 A's, 2 horses. How do you hold up? I think that's a huge, huge point of contention for this game.
Yeah, I know I said it before. I always think of offensive line. Like, you really want to have just like 5 good guys, right? Like, if you have one really real superstar and one kind of guy like that, that is really where I think you fall into problems, because defenses can figure out ways to get kind of isolated matchups, right? And the same way that, Diggs and Jefferson dictate coverage, I think Z Smith does dictate the front in a specific way, in that, like, versus Washington, he was lined up kind of over the guard. So center and guard are kind of doubling him, right? Which, if you have 5 offensive linemen and 4 defensive linemen, that makes sense, right? Like, 2 is going to end up in some sort of way. But that means that the defensive line gets real kind of pure, clean one-on-ones elsewhere, which is often, right? Like, that's going to happen kind of everywhere. But if you're winning those, that is deflating on the offensive end, right? And I like that. The world of pass rush, it's not just sacks, right? We can't just think about it as sack numbers. Pressure is pressures, yeah, right? Like, think about it. Please think about it as pressures instead of just sacks, right? Because if you are constantly having your hand in the face of the quarterback, if you are forcing the quarterback off their spot, right? If you are getting your hands up in the passing game, doesn't matter what's happening on the all 22 behind that, right? Like, that the meat of the play is happening right in front of the quarterback's eyes, right? And anything that can speed the quarterback up, can mess with their feet, right? Can force them off a read quicker because their clock is ticking a little bit extra. That is so, so important. And I think the Vikings can get away with some of the, again, I don't like using the word softer, but like, you can get away with some things on the back end when you're attacking like that on the front end. Yeah. And like, Za'Darius Smith is going to win a matchup on Sunday, right? Like, there's just no way around that. And the last 2 matchups playing against Kyler and Heineke, like, where they have their edge rushers box and that middle guy, or Z Smith in the middle kind of doing things, like, you guys got to watch Danielle Hunter. Like, he is so non-traditional in like the way he like sets up moves. It's like, I can't even say if it's good or bad. It's just so different, right? Yeah, I think tackles talk about it all the time. Like, they're just like, it's just like a weird thing to prepare for, because like, you're not even sure what his pass rush plan is, because like,
he moves so weird,
like freestyle dancing. Yeah, it's so interesting, and
he strings moves together out of like just the way he like steps and shifts, and the way his hands can move in conjunction with his feet. But the way he does it, like, he had a couple outside rushes that he executed from like on the inside shoulder of the tackle. And I don't know if it's because his stride is so long and he's able to do it, but I literally rewound and I was like, how the hell did he get outside like that? Like he's just a pterodactyl and a freak of nature there.
Yeah, I think one of his sacks, it was like Heineke was like 10 yards deep and he didn't step up. And like, obviously the criticism is like, yeah, well, a tackle can't like physically block someone that deep because like the angle is just obviously in the defensive end's favor. So you need the quarterback to step up. But if you have Za'Darius Smith on the inside, like that is going to be a problem, right? Like you can't just step up when like my guy has like both of his paws on your face, right? Like you just can't do that.
If the depth of the pocket is breaking and compromised, you cannot step up, and that's a problem.
Yeah, so I like that the Vikings have faced, like they did a decent job kind of boxing Kyler Murray and obviously Heineke as well, who's like obviously a different athlete. Not that he's not a good athlete, but like having that in our back pocket, the last kind of 2 games, if we see Josh Allen, we are not going to contain him. Right? It is impossible to, but at least having a plan, right? And like it's hard for any team once a quarterback breaks the pocket, or when these guys break the pocket, it's like, well, like that's when you kind of get nervous when you're watching a little bit, but having a full pass rush plan that they've executed, I think, pretty well the last 2 weeks. I'm excited to see that, right? Like so much of your offense, like you can have the fanciest, schmanciest play called up. You can have the best players on the field. If you cannot block up front and the defense is constantly kind of getting hands in your quarterback's face, you cannot find success. And I think maybe it's just as simple as the team that pressures the other quarterback more wins, right? Like it may just be that simple. And it's fun that we have 2 really, really good defensive lines against 2 offensive lines who we feel good, but maybe not great about. Right. Yeah. So I'm just excited, right? That's something you can see on the TV copy, right? You don't even really have to go to the all 22 to figure out, well, my guard's getting his butt kicked. Right. So it's, who's going to eat, right?
That's it.
People are going to, right? So it'll be fun to see almost a competition between the kind of the 2 sides, who's getting after the quarterback a little more.
I think that's a beautiful way to sum it up. Like I was thinking it as you were saying it. It's really comes down to which defensive line is able to dominate more and which offensive line is able to mitigate that mismatch and that disadvantage more, however they do it, in whatever way. Like that, I think really is what decides it, because you've got 2 defensive lines with studs, 2 defensive lines that really are the engines of their defense. And going up against 2 offensive lines that have vulnerabilities at different spots for different reasons. And that's what it comes down to. And then you add in the variability of, Josh Allen and the Case Keenum piece, and everything stems from that initial trench warfare on both sides of the ball. And it's going to be exciting to see in this game. And I was very excited to chop this up with you going into this episode. And as we went through, I had even more of a blast. We talked initially and I was like, are you good for 45 minutes to an hour? And you were like, yeah, but I can go longer, whatever you want to do. And I was like, cool, let's do it. And I haven't even really realized the time, but we've been rolling for an hour and 37 minutes and some seconds at this point. You were phenomenal. I got completely lost in this conversation, just talking ball and chopping it up. You were an absolute gem, a treat. I was tremendously excited again to have you on this show. As we've kind of built up some rapport and relationship in the DMs on Twitter. And you crushed it in every way, shape, and form. So thank you so much again for being here. And just in case people came in late and didn't see you initially plug all your stuff in the beginning, again, awesome comment here from Jason who said, this has been awesome. Just been sitting here listening and learning. That a lot of that is kudos and credit to you, Shawn. So again, just in case people don't know, plug your stuff. Who are you? What you do? Where they can find you? Because again, you're one of the best follows and reads for what you do for the Daily Norseman and follows on Twitter. Like you are somebody who I like to think of myself as a pretty knowledgeable guy on football. You are one of a select few of people who, increase my knowledge, who I learned from. So plug your stuff. You're fantastic. Everybody should know who you are and what you do.
And it means a ton. It was really, really fun. And I can't even look at the time because it was so many things rolling and all the points kind of coming together. But if you like what you heard, all you got to do is follow @SyedSchemes. It's look, I'm ready for the Vikings this year, but like I watch the whole league. I love football for all its ups and all its downs. And before I leave, Anthony, I do want to just pop off my final Vikings take if everyone would indulge me.
No, unacceptable. Okay. You're not allowed.
Yeah. Guys, so if you stuck this far, like I'm sure that you guys are waning off a little bit, but every single week, I just don't know what to think of the Vikings, right? The Vikings are 7-1. It's not that they're like the best team that's ever been constructed, right? Like they constantly face these teams And I'm a huge film fan. Like last year, the Oscars, there's 53 movies nominated. I saw every single one of those, right? So like I love movies. And I also love superhero movies, right? Like I know Anthony's got some comics behind him. I got some stuff behind me. I obviously got my Black Panther 2 tickets for Thursday night.
Nice.
And like we struggle to define the Vikings because they keep playing these kind of up and down games. But the definitive explanation, obviously, is that the Vikings are a Marvel movie. Right. So Marvel movies like the Vikings, right? The Vikings, I think they lead the league in the most points scored on their opening drives, right? Usually start strong, right? Like think of the animation Black Panther, the tone setting of Thor Ragnarok. Like you have these really strong starts. And then both Marvel movies and the Vikings, they kind of get up and down in the middle of the product, right? Sometimes uneven tone, sometimes low early down success rate. Marvel movies still going to draw the top end talent, right? Mm-hmm. Like you're going to get great performances like Chadwick Boseman, obviously Robert Downey Jr. Vikings have stars like Justin Jefferson and Za'Darius Smith, right? But by the end of Marvel movies, usually I just feel like I rode like this roller coaster of like crazy highs, right? Like Justin Jefferson gritting in the end zone, and then crazy lows. Like how many 3-and-outs are we going to have in a row? Maybe a head scratcher here and there. But I usually feel satisfied with the time spent, right? So as long as the Vikings keep winning, I think obviously everyone's going to keep being entertained. Got a little bit of a rough stretch coming up, and maybe I should just make this my just like a PhD thesis. Obviously, I'll spare the Cover One faithful, but the Vikings are a Marvel movie. You heard it here first, because Marvel movies have such a wide range of outcomes. The Vikings have been winning these games. There's ups and downs. There's great starts. There's happen to be great finishes. But in the end, we're entertained. So I'm really excited for Black Panther 2 on Thursday. Obviously, follow me on Twitter at Syed Schemes. I'd keep my movie takes off the Twitter. It's really just kind of strictly film stuff. But, send me some DMs. If you want to talk some crap on Sunday, if the Bills beat out the Vikings, I'd be more than happy to hear that as well.
I am so mad at myself because I wanted to tee you up for that because I knew it was coming, and I completely spaced because I got lost in the football conversation of this episode. And as soon as you were like, I got one more take, I immediately was like, I remember what it was, and I just sat back and listened because I knew the Marvel take was coming. I apologize for that. I had a whole tee up plan. I failed you, but you crushed it.
I just had to get it off just so now, it's on wax, right? Like people know that I was the first one to say it.
Yes.
It could totally be unfounded, right? But ups and downs, fun things here, fun things there, head scratchers here, head scratchers there. I guess Marvel movies maybe don't have the same amount of like just making like people in the theater injured the same way that I guess the Vikings somehow do. But everyone go see Black Panther on Thursday.
Nice plug. That's the central thesis of this episode.
I'm not employed by the Walt Disney Corporation or Michael Mouse in any sort of way, but go to the movie theater, guys.
At the end of the day, this matchup is all about going to see the second Black Panther. So go to that. I'm going to see it Saturday. So I'll be messaging you about it after I see it on Saturday.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, it'll be a good time. Shawn, you were tremendous. Again, as I mentioned in the intro, outro, everything. You absolutely crushed it. I appreciate the hell out of you for taking a lot of time to sit and chop it up with me tonight. In addition to the preparation and everything you put into this episode, man, it sincerely means a lot, and I'm glad to have done this. And I shouldn't even say see you later because I'm going to DM you after, and we'll probably keep talking on Twitter like we normally do. So I appreciate the hell out of you, man.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate it.
All right, man. Take it easy.
Peace.
What a tremendous guest that we continue to have a lot of great guests on this show. And man, I'm a huge fan of Shawn's, like I mentioned. Just an absolute tremendous guest. Thank you very much, Sarah, for saying thanks, guys. Great show. We're going to talk about a couple other things as we start to wind down here. But I wanted to mention something that we're very proud of here at Cover One. Have a new sponsorship that we as a brand have started to dive into and have formulated. And to talk about that, I have a video from Cover One's own, Mr. Greg Thompson. I want to play that for you folks right now.
Hey guys, Cover One is excited to announce our new partnership with BetUS. BetUS has a live wagering on all major games, the best betting variety in the business, and an easy deposit and withdrawal process with the fastest payouts in the industry. Our loyal Cover One fans get a choice between two exclusive offers, either a 125% sign-up bonus on your first deposit up to $2,500 or a free $50 bet with no deposit required. Just use promo code COVER1 on the links provided in the show description below. BetUS, where the game begins.
There you go, folks. Get yourself on BetUS, another exciting partnership from Cover One and the entire team. We continue to have, whether it was Underdog Fantasy earlier in the year, these partnerships that we continue to bring up and gather. So go get yourself some action over there on BetUS. If you live in a state that doesn't allow you to, I apologize, but go get yourself some action on that BetUS piece. Awesome video from Greg there that we were able to incorporate here. And also, if you live in the Buffalo area, go get yourself some of the best pizza, hands down, in Buffalo, aka One Pie Pizza. The online menu can be found in the episode show notes here on YouTube or any one of the podcasting apps or platforms. Go get yourself some One Pie Pizza. Try the new Disguise Coverage Cover One Allen Goat Pizza, goat cheese, some chicken, some red onion, some it's absolutely delicious. Go get yourself some of that Cover One Disguise Coverage Josh Allen Goat Pizza, or a regular traditional pie, quarter sheet, half sheet, whatever you got. The best pizza in Buffalo, hands down. Great people making great food. They do a ton of initiatives and drives for the community and foundations. They're truly good people. It's part of the reason why I also wanted to partner with them. Go get yourself some One Pie Pizza. Do your betting work on BetUS. And that's going to ride us out here on this very informative, learning, educational episode of Disguise Coverage. If you're still here, please, 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 and thank you. Drop a like on this video. I saw a lot of that message coming earlier in the show. Please drop a like on this video if you are here. If you are watching later and not live, that's cool. Please drop a like. It goes a long way towards helping this video and the channel and the team as a whole to track and trend in front of more eyes and ears. If you are listening to this show on any one of the podcasting apps or platforms, that's very cool too. Your listen is very much appreciated. Please rate and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify as well. Again, word of mouth is always fantastic. Tell your family and friends and loved ones about how awesome this show is. If you thought the show was terrible, tell your enemies and try and ruin their day by making them watch this show. Wherever you are listening or watching, please subscribe to Disguise Coverage. It goes a long way. Drop some likes, rates, reviews, all that kind of stuff. Please, 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 and thank you. I want to thank everyone who rode with us live here on this episode of Disguise Coverage. The engagement was fantastic as always. If you watched later, listened later, thank you very much for your listen and your view. Major, major thank you to Mr. Shawn Syed, aka @Syed Schemes on Twitter. Genuinely one of the best in the business. I don't bring guests that are anything less than top-notch quality here on the show. So very, very many thank yous. That's not even proper grammar, but whatever. Huge thank you to Shawn for jumping onto the show. Huge thank you to everyone who supports in any way, shape, or form. Hope you and your family and friends and loved ones are all doing well, staying safe. Be kind to one another. Take care of one another. Hope everybody has a good week and a good weekend. Godspeed. I will see you next week. And as always, go Bills.